Hi, I'm Seamless, and it's time for another How to Synth tutorial. I wanted to take a break from doing hardcore, super rigid reality real synthesis and do something kind of fantastic and neat. So, check this out. That's a fun sound. So, as you can see, this is two Harmors doing a thing. This is just a compressor that I have open because it has the final visualization of what the thing is doing. But these two Harmors are generating the jazz. The fun thing that they're doing is that the prism is set on to change input based on volume, or change position based on volume input. So you see how the little strands of our harmonics are kind of moving around. That motion is happening because I have a prism shape going on, and then I have that engaged, which means that as the thingy gets quieter or louder, it will change how much prism is applied to it. There's an inverse of the main setting, and I just picked the one that sounded okay, and that's moving forward. But what's neat is in the advanced tab, you can set the order in which these things get calculated. And if you put the prism after things that do volume change, like in this example, the filter and also the phaser, then you get this result where it'll start to move based on that little map there. And this is super neat because there's a phaser mode called frequency mode where it'll do the jazz you tell it, it'll do the jazz you tell it to do normally, but instead of applying its shape change to volume information, it'll do it to pitch information. And wild and nuts things happens, and you can do lots of really stuff with it. But with this mode, we have the prism after the phaser doing this sort of pitch track stuff. You get the best of both worlds. You have it do volume change and an associated pitch change with the same phaser shape. So you're kind of just locked into that one, you know, if you're going to automate it in that regard. But it is particularly neat combo. I haven't really done a whole lot of this on like high frequency stuff, but it is actually kind of awesome, as you heard in it. The two of them, the difference between them is that one of them is a high and one of them is just an octave lower. But and this was actually basically created essentially as a reverb spicener, because one of the techniques that I do and advocate is and make a more interesting reverb. You make another layer of the same synth you have just in a different octave. This way, when you put it through some other reverb send or the same reverb send, if it's not in there with the dry, it sounds like the reverb had this quality that changed the sound, and it's a neat effect to have that be a thing. And in this case, it sort of evolved into being an extra layer, but it does have a much longer attack on it, just in the volume dealy. The dealy, there it is, that dealt there. But the actual kicker of this whole thing, just in doing. Other than that, this vocoder is being modulated. Actually, a big part of the modulation is this guy. But a lot of the rest of it, the entire like huge roomy reverb architecture you're hearing, is this stuff. And what the heck is this? Well, this is me just making a kind of a reverb module. Excuse me. So a more complicated reverb thing that's more than just like a reverb unit and a delay. Honestly, is usually just a collection of more reverbs and delays. Like it's essentially this. What this is in just a circuit sense is a reverb into 3 delays EQ'd up into a reverb, kind of cross into itself too, into more delays, into reverb. That's it. And the value of this is it just serves to complicate up the reverb signal, which makes what it makes a more like a quote unquote better reverb better, and it has that kind of depth of complication to it. And then I want to have control over it, so then it was just all this. It's really mostly just the units, like the controls that I care about in this regard, just brought up in front, as though I had all 4 of them just on. That's the beauty of Patcher, is that you can do this kind of thing in a preset. And then in here, what's also neat, I have this peak controller that's a really kind of slow on build-up, but it's even slower translated through here with this speed knob. It's only going I guess going to all of them. Yeah. So I have this really slow. I'm actually keeping the smoothing on, which I don't normally do. And so that this happens. When the level comes on, it comes off. It moves. What in this case is the delay time on these guys very lightly. That little pitchy motion you're hearing at the end of the thing is not just the pitch changing inside Harmor, but it's also the pitch changing out here. And that's causing also an additional complication to the delay, or to the reverb, because it's responding to the input. Makes it feel more related. And there's just also another one. This is just a clone of the same thing, just with different settings. Which is the point of having this, is that like I don't have to set this up 1,000 times. I could just be like, yay, cool, boop, and there's your bowls, and then EQ'd up. So let's listen to what these parts sound like, not bathed in 10 pounds of reverb. Here's the main component guy, just by himself. Isn't that just such a dumb sound? Like this, oh boy, I love this vocoder. It's so old, but what it is like, this is the precursor to the Vocodex, but it has one thing that Vocodex doesn't have, which is these buttons here, which I'm not even really using. Is there a form? Yeah, so there's this control inside Vocodex. Like that's just this guy. Yeah, this control here. But what I manipulated here to make it kind of sound like kind of okay is this min, max, and these scale knobs. And then of course there's bandwidth, which we're familiar with. It's this dude here. But those min, max, and scale knobs are actually knob versions of this graph. What this graph does when it's active is it changes the distribution and like the placement and sort of visual thickness of the band, like individual bands in the vocoder, and that causes a change in the split of where like the phasing occurs. And the min-max setting is basically just where is that there, and then the scale is that basically exactly this I just did, the curvature I just made. The change between a perfectly even octave note-based representation all the way up the scale, which is not congruent with harmonic structure, or all the way up to being basically the order of a saw wave with the harmonic structure, congruent with the harmonic structure. And that's sort of these guys up here. And what's real fun about those is that you can automate them. And that means that you, like, as though, imagine if you could automate that graph in Vocodex. That'd be insane. But that's what this is. And this came first. That you can actually, that there was a focus in being able to move it around. And that makes this thing still pretty epic. I didn't utilize any of that to do this. I have plans to do so, but like I could have done this in Vocodex, but it is lighter than Vocodex, that's for damn sure. Especially if I'm just doing this. But this particular sound, I basically developed without listening to it. I made the reverb first. I did actually make the reverb first. Like how the hell often does that happen? How often do you start a sound reverb first? But I did, and then like I was testing it with just a naked saw wave, and then I started making adjustments just to see how things would do, and trying to create certain realities and see what happens with certain things, and basically got around here to doing this. And then I just, as jokes, kind of put this on here with the intention of seeing if I can integrate it into the engine just to be unique, because it is a neat kind of just trick to use a Vocodex or a vocoder just to be a kind of complicated phaser. Just a bunch of filters in a row, messing with stuff. And but have like a light version is a little bit better than the whole Vocodex. I'm not even really sure if there's that big a like process deficit or something. I don't know. But yeah. The rest of it is actually using those controls to actually tune it to be a thing. The compressor is a deal. Wow, so these dudes are this creates some pretty intensely wild level output. Oh yeah, and the lower guy, let's see here this sounds like. I actually don't know what this sounds like. Huh. That's the phaser causing the pitch change. So the X control also changes the width of the phaser. That's what that does. So that's the experience that's going into the reverb channel that's doing all the stuff it does. So that normally sounds like the job of just one reverb unit or one particularly well-developed delay unit that you know, boasts some pretty sick presets and you come out with it, and that's just what it sounds like. And it's because it's a collection of stuff. It's just a whole bunch of sends and layers and intermodulation that, because of that, is why. And I wanted to see how well or hard it could be done. I'm not sure that was a statement that made sense, but I feel like you get me on this concept. But the reason why this video is not just about this is because I'm not really sold on this particular version of it as being anything worthwhile. But it's here, and got used to make this, and this is a neat step. It's a neat direction, I think. But I'm going to try to work more into something neater than that before it's its own dealie. But on the overall kind of deal of this, though, this does illustrate a point, which is that overall, when you're making just any kind of ambient backgroundy anything that you're going to make like a big pad or something, just destroy it in reverb and delay. Like that's your layering consideration now. It's not even about there being extra harmonic content or extra whatever. It's a time thing now. It's about how much more and on top of it and then through and then the effect of it, and can there be extra effect? Can there be another impact? What's neat about this whole thing is putting reverb before delay messes that up, and then put a reverb on again. Like that the idea is like individually they wouldn't be all that interesting. And also outside of like the blur, this mess wouldn't be interesting either. Even like this step wouldn't be interesting, this step wouldn't be interesting, this step wouldn't be interesting, but this finally is enough kind of internal complication that it sounds like kind of a big old procession of something neat. And it has enough bits that you can change enough of it to be either pretty much anything you want or kind of wild, unpredictable things. Like I actually put the delay value upon this one, which I barely ever use, even in like a deliberate like piece like bespoke reverb like setups. There's a lot of qualities in there that I pretty much didn't plan for, but I'm pretty happy that did happen. But much like bass processing, reverb sending nonsense into compression kind of thing is like progressive ambient genres versions of distortion processing, which means the source of the content has an incredibly important role in the ultimate end as just as much as the process does. Like there's only so much a vocoder it can do, which is a hell of a lot, but ultimately if you're not happy with the sound, then you probably have to change the sources. And same thing with like your big pads. It's about the content that causes a result, not so much as close as you can generating that result at the beginning. Because if you're not familiar with the idea that like one of the things that like is occurring to me now is because of all that string processing, trying to get that down, like focusing on things like resonant body and over energying things, which like is a big oh no duh moment for me because of just what I'm saying about distortion and bass processing, where like yeah, you put in like two sine waves and you crush it to death, you come out with like crazy complication that absolutely is ridiculous that generated from sine wave. For having not have having any of that harmonic content, sure, why not? The Mad Hatter had it. That like sort of foreknowledge would save you from attempting to put something complicated into something more complicated, expecting like a consummate complication to come out, and not that it is a sort of procedural thing where like a lower entity in certain regards has to go in to come out a certain way, but also a higher entity. It's like because like how rigid and weird this guy sounded and how forceful this dude sounds also, like phasery and sharp and weird, and has a sound that has basically no quality that I want to ever actually hear. But when it gets run through something that blows it up like this, that's actually making it usable. And I'm harping on this kind of a lot because I mean, obvious or not, that was kind of a huge impediment in my sound design for a long time. The idea that like I would try real hard to get like as much of a thing I can out of every step of a thing I do. Trying to like, okay, I made a waveform. Like, I guess I'll try to my best to get a waveform that will sound like the thing I want to get. And if I'm trying to make a big pad thing, like that can be a certain idea, but especially if you're considering the idea that like you're making something that's kind of soft or kind of like regular, you might not consider that you're going to do things like distort it a lot or go for a particularly harsh high-end experience. But then maybe you will when you realize that, yeah, it's going to get dampened down to hell when it gets put through a reverb thing. You're probably going to EQ it down later. Plus all these extra layers to give you the option to pick which ones do or do not have that kind of energy present. And that's also why in here I put the dampening knob as a thing. Because that's the idea, is that like that extra energy, even if you don't hear it in the end result, it went somewhere to make the things that did end up in the end result. And even though none of like this weird phasing makes any sense by itself, when it gets run through all this nonsense, it kind of sounds like a choir sometimes. And like that's a quality that I maybe could have wrought like from an original result, but then by the time I got put it in here, it would come out either sounding like a mess for being too similar to the process that's being run into. So just it almost comes out as bad as if you had just offended against itself. And for vocal quality things that aren't rigidly in phase, that is a absolute disaster. But the idea that you can kind of contend for that just with the knowledge that, yeah, maybe wildly inconsiderate sources are actually the cause of the coolness when they get put into processes that have a lot of power. And that's how you know when a process might be this way. Things like distortion, that like a distortion is like it's like an element of the universe. It's pretty much like it's multiplication. It's literally just like second order math to do this stuff. So it could do everything to anything. So what you put into it is the whole bag. And then there's vocoding, incredibly ridiculous plugins, like with so much power, so many ways to change things, so many more in-depth ways to change even those things. Like you would think that you could put anything in here, do some stuff to it, and get anything you want out of it just by what you can change in here. But honestly, the best results are going to come from experimentation and picking a setting and then just messing with an input. And that's why this guy worked out so well, is that I made the setting and then I made the input. I started making the input with the setting on more or less the whole time. And I was able to get to results that I would probably not have thought to do if I started like with the intention and like worked chronologically. Wow, it's weird how that paradigm shows up in here, isn't it? Huh. All right. Well, if you have any more questions about this, please let me know. This, I guess this patcher will be available in the download and description of this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all of that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.